Hello and welcome to tonight's cross-country safety seminar from Copa. We're so happy to have you here, especially on St. Paddy's Day. You're exchanging some green beverages to be with us, or perhaps you're enjoying one with us. So thank you for being here. I already see some folks in the chat saying hi. We're very excited to have you here. So I'm Sharon Chung. I'm the Director of National Programming at Copa. It's so lovely to be here with you. I have Christine Gervais, who is our president and CEO, of course. I have Chioma Okoro, the brilliant, lovely Chioma, and also OpeOluwa Iyortim. And we're very excited to go over this event with you. I'm going to quickly launch a poll. We want to assess who here has flown across country prior to today's seminar, so we can test that out. So as you're introducing yourselves, please answer that as well. So Christine, we haven't seen you in a while. It's good to have you back here. For those who are just meeting you for the first time, could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. I was just actually looking in the chat and looking at where everybody was from. We've got people from Chicoutimi, St. Thomas in Ontario, Victoria, Cambridge, Thompson, oh my gosh, Montreal, Bancroft, Kitchener, Sept-Îles, Calgary. So coast to coast, really. So welcome, everybody. Christine Gervais, I'm President and CEO of Copa. So just, I'm not going to go in great detail, but I do have an aviation background. I started off as a commercial pilot. I did that I flew float planes in Northern Ontario, and then I moved on to survey flying in South America and the Arctic and in Africa, and then corporate flying, and then moved on to become an air traffic controller. Did that for about a decade and really missed the flying part of the world. So the opportunity came to come back and on this side of the microphone. And so this is how I ended up at Copa. Yeah. I'm just concarding. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody. Thank you, Machingra.
Awesome. I mean, a woman who does it all, right? And we just wrapped up and celebrated Women in Aviation Week, so that's awesome. Going back to the poll, I see that pretty much everybody here has flown across country before, so a lot of what we'll cover, or what Chioma and Ops will cover, will be a good refresher for you. Any questions that you have, look to the right of your screen if you're on a laptop or computer. There is that chat there, and pop it in. Please do mark your question as a Q&A. It'll allow Christine and myself to pop that in and ask our two instructors. And if you are finding the chat distracting, there's those three little dots on your screen. You can click on it and it pushes the chat away, so you can toggle that on and off. Going back to Christine, Copa is very busy these days. Could you highlight some need-to-knows to the students?
Yes, so a very busy time for Copa. I'm really not going to touch on everything that we're doing because it would probably take the whole 2 hours. So we're going to stick to the fun stuff. We do have a leadership summit that is coming up. And that is for our Copa flight captains or their delegates and a leader in the making from the Copa flight. Very exciting. We want to reconnect with our Copa flights. We want to give them the opportunity we want to give them an opportunity to share their experiences, the successes of certain Copa flights with other Copa flights, and as well as provide you with some guidance material on how to host successful events. And talk about our modernized Discover Aviation program and provide the tools for all of that. So that's been in the making. Obviously, what's keeping us really, really busy these days is the planning of our annual event. It is happening. It will not be canceled one more year. I hope that we see as many of you as possible in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. I do have to say it is a very beautiful region. It is the first time that Copa hosts in the province of Quebec. And it is a very, very beautiful region. Lots of parking for airplanes. Obviously, first come, first serve for parking for airplanes. Registration is going to open probably next week, if I'm not mistaken. Keep on a lookout for that. We'll send you all the information via social media. It's also going to be available on our website. So that's obviously going to keep us busy for the next couple of months. We want to make this, an incredibly fun event. So because we haven't seen you in over 2 years, and we're really, really looking forward, especially, we're all new to the Copa team is very new, and we're very much looking forward to meeting everybody in person, because we haven't met anybody in person yet, or very few anyway. So looking forward to that. And of course, during the event, we do want to recognize, even though it's been COVID and we haven't been able to do the things that we normally do, there are still some volunteers out there who do everything that they can for general aviation, and we want to recognize that. Our awards program is in full swing. So if you do know a deserving aviator or an aviation enthusiast, please do submit their nominations, and we will present those at the National Fly-In. The dates for that is June 23rd to 26th. The 24th, for those of you who are joining us, is actually the Fête Nationale. So it's the biggest party in Quebec. And so you're all invited for that. So keeping busy. The whole team is really working hard for everyone. So I'm going to leave it at that. Otherwise, I can keep talking for hours.
I feel the same way. So onwards and upwards, we're all itching to meet you. So I'm going to throw some links in the chat. I'm seeing some comments here about audio. If I'm going to stop talking then pretty much if it is me, but if you have any tech issues, refresh your screen and it should resolve the issue. Otherwise, I'm going to kick it over to Christine to have a conversation with both Wilma and Elsa.
Okay, so we are very, very lucky to have these two amazing individuals delivering this seminar. One from very far away. I will let her introduce herself, but we have Chioma who's joining us, and she'll be delivering the first part of the your first cross country. Welcome, Chioma, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm so excited to be speaking today. I'm Chioma, and I'm a CPL student at Langley Flying School in British Columbia. At the same time, I'm also a doctorate student, basically building models that will make aircraft maintenance more data-driven, more optimized, and more cost-effective. When I'm not doing any of that, I volunteer for the BC Coast 99s. I am part of the Speakers Bureau of the BCAC. I am also a volunteer for the CWIA and also a volunteer for UPN. And I serve on the junior board of the Northern Lights Aero Foundation. I also enjoy taking long walks and photography, and I'll be taking the first session today. I hope you enjoy it.
Wow, what a resume, Chioma. Seriously, very, very impressive with everything that you're doing for general aviation. I applaud you, and best of luck in your continued training for your commercial pilot's license. Langley is a beautiful airport, so you're very lucky to be doing it out there. Our next presenter is Ops, and I'm going to let him, also very impressive resume, so I'm going to let him present himself as well. Go ahead, Ops.
Hi, thanks, Christine. Hello, everyone. My name is OpeOluwa Iyortim. I go by Ops. I'm first officer at Mainline WestJet based out of Toronto. I'm also a Class 2 flight instructor, and I operate out of the East Coast majorly. I started and run a pilot career coaching and development platform called the Vectored Approach. We help pilots develop their careers, counseling and all that. I also sit on the Black Aviation Professionals Network as the head of pilot development, helping develop the next generation of minority pilots in Canada to be able to build rewarding careers. I'm happy to be able to talk to everyone today. And incidentally, I'm also Nigerian, like Chioma originally. Back to you, Christine.
Again, very impressive resume, very involved in aviation and aviation safety. So you are all in very, very good hands. I see there's over 250 people right now, so that's fantastic. Probably more. Some of you are probably paired up. I just wanted to say that one of the main reasons why I wanted to participate in this seminar particularly is two reasons. One is we are wrapping up, as Sharon mentioned, Women in Aviation Week. So I want to give a huge, huge shout out to all of the women aviators out there. I know your struggles, I know your opportunities, and I share them. And I also want to give a shout out to all of the individuals out there who support these women and help them advance their careers and provide the support that they need. So it's not just about the women, but it's about the supporters who help these women advance in aviation. So I think that's probably everybody on this video and everybody behind the scenes as well. So happy International Women in Aviation Week. And then the other reason really was because for me, my first cross country, and my second and my third, really the first few ones where you're learning the most amount of things. And Chioma and Ops, please feel free to jump in here. For me, it was like really the most fun I ever had in my flying because it was exhilarating, it was new, and I got to use everything that I was learning. And it was amazing when I got it right. You know, sometimes I do remember a couple of times where you've got your map. Yes, because at the time I had a paper map. That's all I had. We didn't have GPSs back then. I had my paper map, and sometimes I'm like, uh-oh, I don't recognize that lake. Uh-oh. And then for a minute you have that tiny little moment of panic, and then you recognize the shape of the lake, and you're like, oh no, I'm on track. And it was just anyway, so for me, it brings back a lot of fantastic memories. It was probably some of the best flying I remember doing, even coming back to aviation after so many years. You know, in my own small aircraft, it felt like the first few times was my first cross country. So very excited to be here and listening in on this first cross country 101.
Thank you very much, Christine. And yes, so I'm going to start the presentation, and Ope and I will hit it up right away. Just a second.
So for those of you who, I'll just go through a few things. We are going to have a couple of breaks throughout the presentation, so don't worry. We're not going to make you sit there for 2.5 hours without leaving to get yourself your third or fourth green beer. But just a few things. There is going to be a question period. So I'm copying down all of the questions from the Q&A, and we will get to them at one of our breaks, and perhaps even it will be answered throughout the presentation. So I just wanted to get that done, and but please either put them in. I'm really going to monitor the Q&A for the questions more than the chat room. So if you do have a question for Chioma, Ops, or myself, or Sharon, she can pop in anytime. We can answer your question. So over to you, Chioma.
Thank you very much, Christine, and thank you everyone once again. So today we'll be talking about cross-country flying. Ope and I will be presenting, and this webinar is divided into 4 sections. So the first 2 parts I'll take it, and Ope will take part 3 and 4. So I'll be talking about documents and VFR limitations, pre-flight preparations, how to select your chart, choosing your routes, and Ope will discuss weather and the actual trip. So the first thing for any flight, so before you go flying, before the actual flight happens, even if you've done all the planning, when you get to the airport, you have to make sure that the aircraft is ready for flight. If all these documents that are required are not on board, or if one of them is outdated or expired, then the actual flight cannot happen. You have to make sure that you have the crew license, which is recent and current with the accompanying medical, your journey log, there are no snags or defects, and that all the deferrals are in place. You have to have the certificate of registration, certificate of airworthiness, the weight and balance must be done, proof of insurance, the pilot operating handbook, and your intercept orders. Now, in the aircraft journey log, you have to make sure that the pitot static system has been checked within the last 24 months. The compass has been swung within the last 12 months. ELT has been checked typically within 12 months. There's still time to the next inspection. There are no snags and defects, and the deferrals are all in place. This is what a C of A, the certificate of airworthiness, looks like, and the registration and the POH. Now, the crew license is not valid without a medical. So you have to make sure that your medical is current and that your license is up to date and appropriate for the flight. You have to make sure that you're current and that you're recent in accordance with the CAS. Okay, so I'm going to put up a poll right now. I'd like to know if any of us here has ever flown to an airport that didn't have a service or facility available. So you got there and, for instance, there was no fuel or oil. Oh, I see everyone participating. Wow. Oh, this is really good insight. So about 57% of us have flown to an airport and didn't find a service or facility available. Thank you so much for this insight. And this can actually be prevented by looking at the CFS. So the first step after you've decided which airports you're going to go to, you've planned this beautiful flight, you want to go somewhere, the weather forecast looks good, is to check the CFS. So I personally don't only check for the airports I'll be using, but I also will check the airports en route. So for today's flight, we'll be going from Langley to Hope. And en route this flight, there's the Abbotsford Airport and there's Chilliwack. So I would typically go through the CFS of both Langley, Hope, Abbotsford, and Chilliwack. How long am I going to spend at Hope? What sort of services will I find there? Is there an FBO? Where will I park my plane in case I want to maybe spend the night there? What services are available? Do I need to take food from Langley, or will I, get food in the terminal, or, even if it's not in the terminal, is it within 5 nautical miles? And all these considerations, that I will be making, I will find information that will help me from the CFS. Of course, all the other details, such as the radio and the procedures to know if the circuit is standard or if it's a right hand, and the noise abatement procedures, they're all in the CFS. So it's important that, in addition to knowing where you're going, that you actually open the CFS. So I typically would use the one on ForeFlight, but I also have a hard copy that I always consult from time to time. And sometimes as well, like one time I was flying in Manitoba, I opened the CFS to check the details of that particular airport. And right there, it says that you have to call before planning a flight to that particular airport. Now, this is something that usually I wasn't used to in BC, but right there in Manitoba, that particular airport had that, requirement. So imagine if I didn't, know this thanks to the CFS, I would have probably gone there and maybe, I don't know what would have happened, but it's always really good to go through the CFS, and not just for your arrival and departure, but for also the airports en route, just in case you have to divert. So you also know what you're going to meet in those places. Like I said, I've also talked about the choice of FBOs, the 4 stops. Examining your route is also a good thing. I like to use Google Earth. 4Flight also has a live view as well, so to see, in addition to my map, to see what that place looks like. What does the airport look like, especially when I'm going there for the first time? I want to see the little markers, okay, what am I going to see to know that I'm already there? These are really important to be safe and to be situationally aware. The CFS will, like I said, tell you the public facilities. These are the codes, this is typically how it will appear in the CFS, but these are the codes to decipher, what is in here. And for instance, at Hope, it says that there are in the public facilities section, it says that we have telephone and food at the aerodrome, and that within 5 nautical miles, there's taxi, accommodation, public internet access. And then in the services section, I can see that there's, jet A fuel, and there is 100 low lead as well. Now, the day of the cross country, for me, because I'm just starting out with flying, I got my PPL April last year, and I've done a couple of cross-country flights. But I always like to plan my flight at least 3 days in advance. That way, I get to do all the calculations well. I'm familiar with the routes on Google Earth. If there's anything I've checked, I start checking the forecast, from that day. I'm looking at various weather sites just to see what it's going to look like that day. Now, on the day of the cross country, you still have to check weather. When I call any FIC, they always will give you a weather report as well. When I started out flying, I used to really love talking to them because they explained in really simple terms. Once I told them I was a student pilot, so they would really, really explain in simple terms. But as I got advanced, I could easily check, NAV Canada website and get that. So if you're really starting out, it's always good to call them, and just as you're about to talk, tell them, oh, I'm a student pilot. Can I get a weather briefing? I'm planning a cross-country flight for Langley to Hope, and they would do it for you. Another thing to look out for is NOTAMs. You need to know the NOTAMs for both airports, and in addition, just for safety reasons, the airports en route. So like I said, in addition to Langley and Hope, Abbotsford and Chilliwack, you also have to be aware of the altitude that you'll be flying. This is based on your flight planning. You would look at the map, know, okay, at this point, I'll be going at this altitude. There are no obstructions and all. And then the actual flight planning form or electronic device that you have. I like to use, because I'm still a student, I like to go paper, but on some days I use 4Flight. And, it's important that if you're really only going to be using 4Flight, that you still carry a paper map with you, and that you always have a power bank just in case anything happens. If you are on your iPad, it's also good to have 4Flight on your phone as well, just to be extra safe and to have, no like disappointments or issues in the air. And of course, nothing beats paper. Paper doesn't have battery. It will never go off. So in addition to that, it's always good to have backup. And your weight and balance should be done as well. If you're taking someone, you should get their weights calculated and make sure that it's within limits. Flight plan, very important to fill it out, to file it, and when you land, to close it. Christine works for NAV Canada, and she says this is a big issue that some pilots may forget. And when you do that, search and rescue is sent out. So one of my pilot friends, I used to fly with her in my early days, and she taught me a lot about, map to ground reading. And she had this thing about, she would have a note in her car that says close flight plan. So for me, I decided to have that note all the time in my knee board. So just in case ATC doesn't, because Langley is a controlled airport, just in case ATC doesn't close for me, that as soon as I, taxi out and I've shut down, that once I open my kneeboard to fill out some details, I see that note that says closed flight plan so that no one comes looking for me. Okay, so before we continue, I'd like to take the next poll. I'd like to really know how we plan our flights. Who is still, going paper-based, and, are we all going electronically? Wow, interesting results. These are very great insights. Thank you very much for taking time to fill out this poll. So 42% of us still go the paper-based system, and 57 is strictly electronical. That's really interesting to know that a lot of people still use paper maps. And so if you're planning your flight electronically, for flight or other flight planning applications will typically have a NOTAM section. So if you're checking your NOTAMs, you just need to, key in the airports that you're going to. But if you're planning paper-based, you'd have to fetch this information from NAV Canada's website. So right here, you can see the NOTAM for Langley and a NOTAM for Hope. So this NOTAM for Langley was effective from the 16th of March at 16:00 Zulu to 17th of March, 01:00 Zulu. And it says all runway lightings 01 and 19 were unserviceable. The PAPI lights on 01 and 19 were not available. And both wind direction indicator lights, that's the windsock lights on threshold 01 and taxiway F, were not available. And that the helipad B lighting and aircraft radio control lighting ARCAL wasn't also available. So if you were going to Langley at night, this information would be really useful for you. I mean, by during these hours, it was obvious that you couldn't use runway 01 or 19. Then for Hope, from the 15th of February to the 12th of May, the first 1250 feet of runway 07 is closed due to soft conditions. Usable runway 0725 full length reduced to 2710 feet with rough and uneven conditions due to frost heaves and frozen molehills. So in that case, when you're landing on 07, you would actually need this important information. So it's really good to always, really important for safety and for yourself to check the NOTAMs as well. And when you're reading the NOTAM, sometimes they'll give you the TALPA number. So the TALPA number is usually on the scale of 1 to 6, with 1 being the least and 6 being the highest. So if you see something like 631, it means at your touchdown, the runway is really good, but midpoint, it's 50-50. Then when you roll out, the conditions are really poor. So these are informations that would help you with your flying in these airports. Now, VFR weather limit. The CARS has a limit for the control zones and control airspace. For my comfort level, and because typically I'm not very experienced, I have personal limits for everything, which is above the standard. For me, I would never go flying if the visibility is less than 6. For a solo flight, I would never do it. This is my comfort level, and it's always recommended that based on your experience, that you choose personal limits that are above the ones recommended in the Canadian aviation regulations. Now let's get to the chat preparation. It's so good to know that 40-something% of us still use the paper charts, which is fun. You need your paper, pencil, flight computer, and your protractor. But if you're using ForeFlight, you just need your device, and you just need to punch in the airports that you're going to. Now, this is what a VFR navigation chart looks like for Langley to Hope. Now, whether you're using a paper chart or an electronic medium, you need to really carefully examine the routes you'll be taking. For instance, for our routes, the maximum elevation figure is 8,300. This area is mountainous. There are cities here and there. I need to also know the airspace. There are various airspaces here. The radio frequencies are also there and also in the CFS. The airports en route, so you have Abbotsford around here and Chilliwack around here. So now, for someone like me who doesn't have a mountain rating, I wouldn't fly this flight just this way. I would actually break it down in such a way that I'll go just through the rivers. I'll follow the rivers all the way to Hope. And I actually broke this down in my 4 flights. So you see that there are several points that, I followed just to be able to not go above the mountains, but to still follow the river and, still be safe. So if I'm starting out this flight from Langley, my set heading point would be Crescent Island. So I would go straight, depending on the departure I was given by ATC. So I would go to Crescent Island. There is a class F airspace here, it's Glen Valley. Typically that's an advisory because lots of student pilots do a lot of air work here. So here, if you look at the map, it says that there is an advisory to 5,500 feet. So these are things you need to note on the map so you know what's going on where and this will help your altitude planning. So I'll go from there to Crescent Island. My next point will be Mission. And then from Mission, the next point I have is west of Dudney, and from there, north of Chilliwack, from there to Agassiz, from Agassiz, just around Ruby Creek. Now, one of the advantages of breaking your flight into multiple segments, in addition to, being for safety and situational awareness, is that when you can start your descent. So for someone like me, I would actually start my descent just before I get to Ruby Creek. So here I will start my descent and prepare for landing from here, around this point, just before this city, before Ruby Creek, just at this bend, I'll start, making my radio calls, and I know I'm getting close to the airport. Of course, when you're planning your flight, if you will be above 3,000 feet, you have to take into consideration your track. So if you're going from 000 to 179, your altitude should be odd numbers plus 500. But if you're going from 180 to 359, it should be even thousands plus 500. Again, consider the winds and the maximum elevation figures when planning for altitude. Then if you're using the paper map, this is actually what your planning log would look like. You would, with the help of your POH as well, and your flight computer and your ruler and protractor, fill in all the spaces here. And when you're calling to file your flight plan, you would actually need this information: total time en route and the fuel, how much endurance you have. Now for the time, I like to give +2 hours when I'm filing, just so that, just in case, I get there and I want to rest more, or, something, just to be on the safe side. And for fuel, I always, the recommendation is to take plus 30 minutes for day VFR as reserve and plus 45 minutes for night VFR. I like to go 1 hour for day VFR, just to be, again, safety considerations and comfort level. These are the numbers, the performance chart for calculating the takeoff distance. And it's actually important that you do all these calculations, especially, you know, if you're going on the soft field or you feel the runway is a bit short and, you know, it's a very cold day or it's a very hot day. This would actually give you, you know, a sense of your takeoff and landing distances. Now, weight and balance, like I previously said, you should calculate this before you get on board. If you're taking a passenger, because I'm just again, as I said, I'm just starting out, so I like to be overly prepared. I always would call, you know, a day before the flight and get the weight and balance info. In fact, before I even accept to take someone on a flight, I would always ask, what's your weight? Because I fly the Cessna 152 and it's just me and the passenger. So it's important that I, you know, make sure that we don't exceed the weight and balance limits. There's also a standard weight chart provided in the CAS, and you can also use that as well. Now, flight plan. Before we go on, I'd like to know if you've ever filed a flight plan on ForeFlight. This is for those who plan electronically. So there's a pool waiting. So I'd like to know if we file our flight plans on ForeFlight or we always call Flight Information Center to file. Okay, I don't see anyone. Okay, yeah, I see some metrics. Okay, thank you very much, everyone who filled out the poll. So 11% of us have filed flight plans on ForeFlight and 88% have never done it. So there are two ways you can file in the world of, you know, electronic applications and all. So you can either call NAV Canada and file using them. So my school has a form. You know, there's always a flight plan flight plan form in the school. So I use that to file. And, you know, you will be asked, of course, your name, passengers on board, your license number for the PIC, you know, your emergency contact and all that. So make sure that, you know, you fill this out before especially if you're starting. But with experience, you know, you would, you know how to do this quicker. And of course, all times are Zulu times. And for ForeFlight, you just need to do this electronically in the section for this. All right, thank you so much for listening. And that's all for my section. Any questions? Christine, do you have any questions?
No, that was fantastic. I'm just going to go right now into the Q&A here. A lot of them we've been answering as we go along. Somebody here, there was mention of a mountain rating. Somebody's asking, there is specific training for mountain flying, but is there actually a rating? So is it a rating or is it just training, additional training?
Sorry, it's a training. Sorry, I got that wrong.
That's okay. It's okay.
Sorry, I got that word wrong. It's a training, and lots of schools in BC offer this. So it's actually part of my CPL training.
And then we just have a comment here that if you have your own airplane, filing a master flight plan with NAV Canada is quite helpful. So yes, that is true, very true. And you can, if you have ForeFlight, as you mentioned, you can do it with that too. I'm just trying to see here what hasn't been answered. That's it. There's no other questions.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for listening. I'm over to Ope to continue.
Thank you so much. I guess we will go over to actually, did we want to take just a short break right now? And yeah, let's let people just have a short break. And we'll come back in 7 minutes. Is 7 minutes okay? 7:17, or is that too long?
Very specific. I like it.
I always say 5 minutes is not long enough. 10 minutes sometimes is too long. So I always go in the middle. So it's 7 minutes. So 7:17, I guess we'll come back. That gives everybody a chance to quick bite break, and I'll go over some of the questions. There was one about stopover times and how do you record stopover times in a flight plan. Perhaps that's something we can answer after the break. So we'll see you in 6 minutes now. Am I the first one back?
I'm here, Christine.
Everybody's back. So somebody's asking where they can see the answers to other people's questions. Unfortunately, the only way we can answer them is privately. Is there a way, Sharon, to answer people's questions so that everybody can see the answers?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So when we apply, it does go private, but what we could do is for some questions that we anticipate that others will also be curious about, we could just put it in the chat to everybody and just assume you know what we're talking about when we answer a question. I sometimes do that. So there has been a question of, for example, this tonight's the cars, and I answered the individual, but I also put it in the chat as well so that everybody was aware.
Okay, so if they go look in the chat, they'll see. So if you're afraid of answering a question that somebody's asked already, please don't. Just we're here to answer your question. So by all means, especially when we're talking about your first cross country, there's so much information that you have to consider to make sure that it's fun. So the planning part is probably the most stressful part, so that you can have fun once you're up in the air and you get to enjoy the sights while you're getting to your destination. So please don't be afraid to ask a question, even if you think that it's been asked. There are no silly questions at all. They're all very valid, and we're here to answer them. I guess we will. I'm going to ask each of you if you have a memorable first cross-country experience. We'll start with Chioma. Do you have a first memorable cross-country experience?
Yes, I do. It was from Langley to Abbotsford, and just after I was, cleared, just before I was cleared out of the control zone, the tower in Langley told me to watch out for an aircraft that wasn't identified. So I lost track. And I was like, where am I? Where am I? And, I remembered my instructor's voice that would say, if you ever feel lost in a controlled space, just let them know and they will vector you. And immediately I just, went to the frequency for Abbotsford and told them I was lost. And they were like, we have you on radar, just straight in final, and you'll be there. And I landed, and yeah, that was a memorable one. And then I remember my 150 nautical mile. That one was good as well.
That's awesome. So lesson there is don't be afraid to talk to air traffic control. Seriously, I was an air traffic controller for 10 years. We are never annoyed with helping airplanes find their way. That's literally what the job is. So how about you, Ops? Do you have a memorable first, or one of the first countries? Do you have a memorable one? Oh, we can't hear you.
Ops, if your mic isn't working, try refreshing your page. Were you able to hear me? I just ran and put on a headset.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I was laughing earlier because of Brian's comment. But about cross country is my very first one actually. So I did my training in Moncton, and your first cross country as a student is between Moncton and Fredericton, about 45 minutes to an hour, and just south of the Fredericton airport is Gagetown. It's a training zone. It's a military training zone. And I remember I was about 10 minutes from the Fredericton airport when this cloud of dust or smoke just rose out of Gishnow and just got caught on the wind and spread all over. It was just thick cloud of haze, and I couldn't see a thing. And so for some reason, I didn't have flight following on that flight. I was in 1267. And I dialed in the Moncton VOR, and I tracked the Moncton VOR back to Moncton. And that's how I got back to Moncton. And my instructor obviously had been watching me in ForeFlight. So he's like, "You didn't get to Fredericton." And I told him, "Yeah, there was this huge plume of haze or smoke." And he laughed. He still, I don't think he, to this day, I don't think he believes me when I tell him that there was something. But yeah, that was my first cross country.
That was your very first one by yourself?
Yeah, by myself.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Well, excellent. So, you know, I think the moral of the story here is that everybody has a memorable, whether it's either the first or close to the first one, everybody has a memorable one. Hopefully it's only tiny little things that went wrong and you learn from it. And it goes to show how important it is to plan properly and to have all of the correct information and to take refreshers like this, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And so anyway, I'm glad I'm glad you're here with us and that you're hosting this seminar for us. So without further ado, I will move on to the next part. I believe Ops, you're the one who's taking this part?
Yep, I'm up.
Okay, over to you then.
Awesome. So let's start the presentation. There we go. All right, so I'm going to be talking about weather forecasts, and I'll be talking about the flight portion itself. To start us off, I'm going to do a little poll just to guide my presentation. How many of us have an IFR rating? And there's a poll live right now. Okay. Looks like we'll keep it VFR for the most part. We've got about 10%-ish that have an IFR rating. All right, thank you. So, weather forecasts. As per Transport Canada, there are some weather forecasts that we have to look at. We're required by law to look at before every flight. And those are the ones that are bolded in the presentation. The graphical area forecasts, airmets, sigmets, meteor and TAFs, PIREPs, upper winds. You have to check that before every flight. Other ones that are nice to look at, the radar reports, for-flight weather. We're kind of for-flight heavy today. I saw someone put in the chat section about how, you know, some people are not comfortable with flying with tablets, and you know, I can sympathize with that. I'm part of that, but I'm forced by work to use tablets, and I guess that's the way the world's going now. With CFS is no longer paper, now it's on a device. So weather information. Basically, that's the link where you can source. Oh, see, I wasn't crazy. Yeah, exactly. Thanks, David. I feel better now. So weather information, you can pull that from plan.navcanada.ca. And it's a nice tool that gives you a drop down. You can check what products you want. Now, it should be noted that there is such a thing as too much information. You can set your search radius. Now, you don't want to set a radius of 50 nautical miles or 100 nautical miles. That's too much. whatever it's comfortable with you, however much information you can manage. Be thorough as you go through that information. Now, as you plan, generally looking at the weather, always leave yourself a way out. Don't look at a forecast and plan, start creating links in the chain of an incident by how you're using those weather products. Now, for the weather products you'll see, the abbreviations, there's a nice document called MANAB right there. If you just take that MANAB and do a Google search, you'll get a nice document from Environment Canada. And it basically has every single abbreviation you'll ever see in a weather report or a GFA in that document. It's very nice to have. Right there, I have a little table from, that's from the TC Ames, just a nice little refresher about what symbology is and surface charts. Excuse me. I have my second screen set up with my notes. So if I look up, I'm looking at my notes up here. Next, we have our GFAs. On the AWWS website, you had to scroll through each forecast by yourself manually. The new setup on the NAV Canada this NAV Canada website is pretty neat. It gives you the GFA in a window, and you can hit play, and it cycles through the 3 GFAs for ice and cloud cover. A GFA on it by itself it gives you some information, but not as much information as it should be given. A GFA should always be looked at in series. You should look at all 3 for the cloud forecast, and you should look at all 3 for the ice and turbulence forecast. And that gives you a good trend information about what's going on along the route of flight. Now, for VFR flying, a lot of pilots don't look at the ice and turbulence chart because they think well, I mean, I'm not flying in cloud, so I don't care where the freezing layer is. That is a misconception because it's the icing and turbulence GFA. Look on it, because sometimes it's a screaming VFR day, not a cloud in sight, winds are, manageable, and there's turbulence from the surface to 3,000 feet or the surface to 10,000 feet. You don't want to be taking your kids or your partner or your friend flying in turbulence, especially in the cross country. You really don't want to be cleaning out little bits of old food from your airplane or from a rented airplane. That's even worse. Moving on. So the document for with the abbreviations is Mike Alpha November Alpha Bravo MANAB. So SIGMETs, AirMETs, PIREPs, why are they important? Well, a SIGMET, significant weather, usually talks about severe meteorological conditions. If a SIGMET pops up along your route of flight, you probably want to reschedule that flight. They're issued for conditions that will prove hazardous for aircraft flight. An AirMET is different in that it is a hazard, but it's a potential hazard. So with an AirMET, it's not a showstopper, but you should be exercising caution. Now that said, SIGMETs and AirMETs both amend the GFA once they're issued. Usually they're valid for 4 hours, and with the exception of a volcanic SIGMET and some exceptions that can be valid for longer. A PIREP, pilot report, is issued by a pilot. Lots of pilots don't do this. Please do. If you're flying and you see something that wasn't forecast, please call it in. Call center, call someone and let them know what's going on, because the sky's huge. It's a huge place. They can't see what's going on at every point. but it's our job as pilots who are out there in the field to call in and say, hey, there's turbulence between here and here. And then everyone behind you coming knows, okay, there's turbulence in there. I put a clip of a PIREP in there so we could talk about how to decode a PIREP. It looks like gibberish, but it's not too complicated to decode. The first code, the first two letters, VR, it's just talking about where it's issued. Now the UUA and UA, that's important to note, that uniform alpha, that means it's urgent. If it's just uniform alpha, that's just a regular PIREP or something that's nice to know. But when you see two uniforms, that means you should pay attention. Next, you have your location of the PIREP over the Vancouver airport. You have the bearing of 045, 35 nautical miles. You have the time, always in Zulu time, during descent. And then you have a type. This is where a lot of the students I work with, I freelance. And lots of the time when they see the type of aircraft, right here we have Sierra Foxtrot 34. Google it, a quick Google search will let you know what type of aircraft that is. In this case, that's a SAB 340. It says there's moderate icing mixed 13,000 to 7,000 feet and severe mixed at 10,000 feet. That's an urgent PIREP because icing is bad for your health. Next. Just gonna have my notes. We have a METAR and TAF. I'm not really gonna touch on this because we're all we know how to decode a METAR and TAF. Now, the reason why it's in here though is it's important that you look at that TAF for your destination, because your destination might be VFR, but let's say you have a cloud deck, an overcast layer at 5,000 feet. That is still VFR weather. However, if you're cruising at 8,005 or 7,005, now you're above that weather. So if you stay at that altitude and you don't plan for that weather at your destination, you're going to get you to your destination. And as most of us don't have IFR ratings, we're going to be stuck without a way to legally get to the airport. So it's important that you pay attention to what the TAF is saying at your destination and how it might possibly affect your flight planning. Next, we have back to foreflight. We can't get away from it. That's just a sample. So today, incidentally, the Langley Airport doesn't have a forecast. It doesn't have a weather station on site. But the great thing about planning applications is that they give you aerodromes with weather stations around that point, and that kind of gives you a good idea of what's going on with the weather in that area. It's also a good place for you to pick up diversion alternates. If something happens and you have to divert, it's good. You know, you'd look at it in the slide, we have Abbotsford, we've got a bunch of options, and that kind of paints you the big picture of what's going on with the weather. Upper winds. Now with the new setup in the plan, the plan at NAV Canada site, they're really helpful, and it's no longer abbreviated like it was in AWWS. It's all spread out. What's important to note here is that you use the upper winds for the time. You see it says 4 U's as in Zulu time. Make sure that when you're looking at it, you're looking at the forecast that applies to your flight. Now, radar. This is the regular radar report that you can access from AWWS and a bunch of other places. Now, a radar, looking at the radar is not a forecast per se. However, it'll tell you what's going on in that moment. It's good for the days, those days when you're waiting for the weather to pass. You're waiting for the storm to push past before you blast off on your flight. Important note, don't try to outrun bad weather. And Sometimes you think you're being smart, you're not. I have a story. I was flying a regional airline flight a couple of years ago, and we had this the squall line, moving, tracking west to east across Canada, across the country. And we were trying to get into an airport in Quebec. I think it was Quebec City. Was it Quebec City? Probably Quebec City. We're trying to get into Quebec City. And so we took extra fuel, like responsible pilots, and then we tracked north and went around the squall, went around the line of thunderstorms, and then came back down south. But then we got to Quebec City at the exact same time that the weather got to Quebec City. And so there we were shooting an approach into Quebec City with thunderstorms and lightning striking all around us. So life lesson there. So yeah, don't try to outrun bad weather. It's better to be on the ground wishing you were in the air than in the air wishing you were on the ground. And always assume the weather is worse than what's picked up on the radar return. You're not going to lose anything from doing that. Now, something useful for those of us who do use ForeFlight. This is an icing chart. This is the US icing chart, but there's also a global icing chart. Now, when you're using this chart, I know technology can be fancy. It's nice and lots of colors. Remember that the charts are not universal. They're not to a universal scale. So, for example, on this icing chart, you see the little table there. It's a light icing, 15 minutes to an hour. Now, that's a wide range. Reason for that, if you remember from PPL ground school, rate of icing depends on your speed, the shape of your airfoil, and all that. So you want to make sure you're interpreting the information correctly. A quick note, and I put that note in there about anti-ice and de-ice equipment. If we had people who had IFR ratings, anti-ice and de-ice equipment is not for flying in icing conditions. It's for getting out of icing conditions. And even the airliners, even flying a big aircraft, a heavy aircraft, we still don't stay in icing conditions. Once we see that there's icing, we find a way to get out of it. So in a little Cirrus, you shouldn't be flying in icing because you've got TKS fluid. Just for later down the line when you get your nice fancy airplane. Now, another note about icing. You will see light. It says 15 minutes to an hour to pick up ice. Now, on the next slide, you'll notice that there's a little table. The conditions, you have a laminar flow GA wing, nice and thin, sporty wing. You have your range of temperatures from -5 to -15. The aircraft is flying at 130 knots indicated. And you see exposure time on the bottom. You have 5 minutes of exposure time. Now, the best performance you get with right rime ice, your angle of attack is down to about 11 degrees. Just think about that. Just you're in ice for 5 minutes and you've lost, what, 6 degrees of angle of attack. So that's how dangerous ice is to your health. Avoid icing at all costs. And if you're VFR, you should not be in cloud. It is dangerous. I'm just going to go through my notes. Now, quick fun fact, if you are flying, when you do get your IFR, if you do, and you're flying a nice fancy aircraft that can punch through icing conditions, you want to stay in icing conditions for the least amount of time possible. So if you're flying out of an airport and there's a cloud deck, you want to hit that cloud deck basically at VX and stay as slow as you can, respecting your stall speeds, and punch through as fast as you can. Next, there's this is not available in Canada right now, but for those of you who will be flying to the States, I noticed in the chat section earlier on, there's some people talking about flying down to Portland. I think someone mentioned another aerodrome in the States. This is a nice tool that ForeFlight also has, where it gives you the turbulence in a nice fancy graphic. Is that yellow, orange? I'm not sure what that color. The thing to note, on the side, I have a little scale, which is not in the application. And that just lets you know that for a light aircraft, which we are, if you have EDR, which is how the app calculates turbulence, eddy dissipation rate, a value of 20 to 15 is moderate turbulence for us. Now, 20 to 15 for a medium aircraft is light turbulence, and for a heavy aircraft, super light turbulence. So basically, when you see that chart, you don't want to be anywhere in that color. So next time you fly to the States, pull this up. It's a nice resource to use. And remember that, stay away from the turbulence. It's not, just because it says medium, it's not going to be medium for you. It's going to be severe in your light aircraft. Do I have notes for that? That's that. Nice little knowledge refresher. Since I talk about light, medium, heavy, the weights of the aircraft. A light aircraft is 7,000 kg. It's from the TCA. I'm not sure why we have kilograms, but that's about 15,400 pounds for your light aircraft, compared to your heavy aircraft, which is almost 300,000 pounds, ranging upwards to 1 million pounds. So that gives you context of when you're looking at those charts. We looked at the turbulence chart and the icing chart. So really, really be safe, be careful. When you see light, it's not necessarily light for you in a small aircraft. It might be medium or severe for you. All right, next we come to human factors. Personally, I think human factors is one topic that isn't discussed enough. Now, in recent times, there's more awareness about the threat and the danger of human factors, because in flying an airplane operation, the human is the weakest link, right? With all the technological advances we have and all the cutting edge avionic systems that exist, we are the weakest part of the operation. And so now we have to be super careful about how we manage ourselves and how we fit into every flight that we do. We'll start off with the I'm Safe checklist. Almost every flight school has this posted on the wall. The problem with things we post on the wall is that we filter them out, right? They're just furniture, part of the wall in the school, the decor. But it's important, really important, that you always go through this checklist before every flight. It could save your life someday. Don't fly if you're ill, obviously. If you're illness, I say obviously, but I also fell victim to this a couple of years back when I was an instructor full-time. I remember going flying with blocked sinuses after hearing all through ground school how you should not go flying blocked sinuses. But, flight instructor life, you're trying to make money, you're trying to pay rent. And I will never be doing that again. That was one of the most horrid flights I've had. Medication, don't go flying if you're using drugs. Stress, if you're feeling stressed, stay on the ground. Alcohol, it's 12 hours now, but transport recommends 24 hours from your last drink till you go flying. Fatigue is important because fatigue, the effects of fatigue on your performance are just the same as the effects of being under the influence. So how the degradation in your performance after you've had a couple of drinks, that's the same amount of degradation in performance you get when you're fatigued. And fatigue causes lack of sleep, or you're bored, or you're just tired. Lastly, eating and drinking. Make sure you're hydrated and you're not hungry. Now, other things to check out. Don't book accommodation before your departure. If you're doing a multi-day cross-country, if possible, book your room once you get there. And that's to prevent get-homeitis. Bring a notebook, a scratch pad. Even pilots that fly every day for a livelihood still write down clearances and instructions. Bring healthy snacks and water. Avoid sugary snacks at all costs. You don't want to be dealing with a sugar crash when you're in busy airspace. Bring your spare a quart of engine oil, or multiple quarts if you need. Now, flight delays are a thing. You plan to take off at 1500 local, something happens and you're not airborne until 1700 local, and now you're doing a night flight, right? So your flight bag should always have your flashlight and the things required for night flying. This goes back to also what Shema talked about looking at the journey logbook. An aircraft that has a deferred landing, like, I'd think twice before taking it on a long cross country if I had a passenger with me. Because now if something happens and I land and that logbook is in another airport with a deferred landing light, and I get spot checked by the transport inspector, they're going to ask me, are you legal right now? Which you wouldn't be. Now, supplies for an unscheduled landing. You never know when you're going to end up in a farmer's field. So in the winter months, always have ski pants, have a heavy jacket, mitts, hip packs if that's what you need. Don't put yourself in a box. Think about worst case scenario. Power bank, Chama talked about that. So we'll have a little pause here. Does anyone have any questions so far? We can't hear you, Christine.
It helps if I put my oh my gosh. It's where I decided to carry your on mute into 2020 just because. There was a question here about what is the document called that has the weather abbreviations?
That's a MANAB. It's the Manual of Abbreviations. Very unimaginative name.
Is that available online?
Yeah, so if you Google MANAB, it's the first ping you get.
And how do you spell the abbreviation?
That's Mike Alpha November Alpha Bravo.
Perfect. I answered the transponder requirements. So somebody did have a question about how do you know what the transponder requirement is at your destination airport. If you wanted to just repeat that, for people may have the same question.
Yeah, so that's hi Civic. So usually there's multiple ways. The official TC answer is that you look at the handbook of the airspace handbook, designated airspace handbook.
Yeah, very good.
And the VNC also has it. You're going to say, Christine?
I was going to say, so it is on the designated airspace handbook. So a lot of people don't know what the DAH is. It's the stands for designated airspace handbook. All pilots should actually be familiar with that. And it basically outlines all of the airspace in Canada. So it's a handbook. It's not a regulatory document. It's just it's there to delineate, the airspace. So what does Class B look like? What does Class A look like? What does Class C look like? But if you look on your VFR map, you will see, the airport where you're going to. In one of the circles, it will say Class C. If it's Class C airspace, you need a Mode C. If it's a Class D airspace, it'll say so. And same with Class E. It'll say Class E Mode C mandatory if because Class E normally would not require a transponder. So it's on your VFR map. So just check your VFR maps. I don't see any other questions.
Awesome. We'll pass on. We're 10 slides and we're almost on, people. Yeah.
Did you want to take another 5-minute break, or were we ready to continue?
I'm probably going to set up a goal for that. But yeah, sure. Let's go 5 minutes break, and then we'll round off.
Okay, so we will come back at 7:57. There you go.
Good job.
7.
Good job.
See you in a bit. Okay, here we are, 7:57 on the nose. So, in fact, and if there's any air traffic controllers out there, unless I'm mistaken, and 757 is actually a medium category aircraft, but the wake turbulence is heavy. So there you go, little known fact.
The more you know. I'm gonna add that to my next presentation.
Or it is a heavy, and it's but it's like the extra mile that you need behind. I don't know, something like that. I haven't been a controller in a while too, but I know that the 757 produces a lot of wake turbulence behind it, so you need an extra mile. There you go. All right, over to you.
We'll carry on then. Next slide. All right, so we've done all the paperwork. We've crossed the T's, dotted all the I's. We're ready to go flying now. The first thing, use of checklists. Funny, I actually had that at the bottom of the page, but then I brought it up to the top at the last minute. It's something that's hammered a lot of the time, or not enough. You should always use a checklist. And why should you use a checklist? You don't use a checklist because of the first flight of the morning when you're fresh and you're good to go. You use your checklist all the time because of the last flight of the day, when it's 2300, when you're on that leg home and you've had a long day and you're tired. That's why you get into the habit of using a checklist. You don't want to be that guy who lands belly up with a landing gear that works perfectly. You just forgot to put it down. Use your checklists. Flight plan versus flight itinerary. You can file both. File a flight plan with Nav Canada, but also let someone on the ground know what you're doing when you're going to be back. It doesn't hurt. Now, obviously, if you're crossing the border, you need to have a flight plan filed, along with a bunch of other requirements. We could probably do something about flying down to the States someday. We'll see how that works. Next, build your nest. So this is something I learned when I got to the airlines. So basically, when you get to the aircraft, the first thing you do is you build your nest. So you get there, you plug in your headset, you get your iPad or tablet, you make sure it's charged, you log in, you have your flight bag, you bring out your pen, you bring out your scratch pad. So for us, every time you go flying, always build your nest before you start the airplane. So make sure your paper chart is folded properly if you're using a paper chart. Make sure your clips, your holders, are set up properly. If you have a suction holder or a cup holder or something, make sure it's good to go. Make sure you put your bottle of water somewhere that's nice and secure. Have your power bank handy. Make sure your loose items are secured. Don't forget your passenger briefing. It's a Transport Canada requirement, but it's very important, especially when you fly passengers, your friends, or your family members. You don't want to be in a situation where something happens and you're unconscious, and your family member, something tragic happens because you didn't take the extra 5 seconds to brief them on how to open the window. ATF and MF departure procedures. Copa will be holding a seminar next month about VFR phraseology and airport procedures. So I'm not going to go into detail. You can tune in next month and you'll catch more details about that. VFR departure procedures. So basically going to a set heading point. If there was a good percentage of IFR pilots, I'd have gone into departing VFR and an IFR flight plan, but we'll leave that for another day. Make sure you make that blind broadcast in 1267. That's a thing people forget. If you're taking off out of that uncontrolled airport, make that blind broadcast in 1267 before you take off, because you want the guy who's overflying the airport to know there's someone taking off before you actually take off. What else do I have in my notes? That's pretty much that. En route. So we've taken off. We followed the checklist. We get to our set heading point. It's important that you use the departure angle technique. If you're using a paper chart and you don't do your departure angle, you risk headed the wrong way. And if you head it the wrong way, obviously your planning becomes irrelevant out the window. You could be flying in circles all day long. So use your departure angle. Look at your track, compare what you're actually doing. Look for features on the ground and make sure you identify them on the map and make sure they correlate. What's supposed to be left of your track is left of your track, and what should be right off track is right off track. Next is flight following, radar surveillance. So actually, a couple of days ago, Christine and I were having a conversation, and it's actually called radar surveillance in Canada. I had no idea. I always just called it flight following. Flight following is actually a US thing, a United States thing. So always ask for flight following or radar surveillance if you can. I mean, why not? It's nothing off your shoulder. You get an extra buffer of safety just with the click of a button. 1 to 6 broadcast, just a quick who you're talking to, who you are, where you're at in 3D, what direction you're headed. Now, it's important what direction you're headed. And I see this a lot. People use cities or towns in their broadcast. Remember, not everyone flying in the area knows what Petty is, or where whatever gauge something is. So always use airports. Airports are safe because most of us have a GPS with an airport. So you're 20 miles northeast of X airport or 30 miles southwest of whatever airport. It helps to say the province you're in the event that you're close to the border. Monitor ground, 1:1.5. You could save someone's life, and someone could save your life someday because you were monitoring ground and you passed across their distress call. Very important. We have that. En route. So we have a fun exercise. I'm going to throw up a poll. So with that picture we have on the screen, so we're flying along and we've flown for 10 minutes. And then with that chart, we realize we're that dot on the screen. What's the procedure? And now we look at it and we guesstimate that we're 6 degrees to the left of the track. How do we get back on track? And there's the poll. Nice little exercise to get our fingers working. Awesome. And yeah. There you go. Do we want to hear the results or no? Okay, we'll end the poll. All right, so back PPL ground school, double the track error. So you're flying, you're 6 degrees off, you want to get back on track, you want to fly 12 degrees to the right for the same amount of time, 10 minutes, and that'll bring you back on track. And then you take away that double, you correct 6 degrees back to the left, and now you're on track. Transport Canada question right there. Now checkpoints. Yeah, Kevin put a nice idea there. If you're lost, yeah, you can use a VFR VOR to triangulate. Checkpoints are important because they serve as fuel and ETA checks. Why is that important? Well, planned performance versus actual performance. I had a story from a friend who used to be a student, who he was ferrying his RV6 from the East Coast over to London, Ontario, I believe. And there's the ridge, there's a mountain range right in the Quebec west of New Brunswick area. And he had to clear that zone. He'd planned to fly at 8,005. Unfortunately, a cloud deck came in that was unforecast. And so he had to drop down, way down. I think at the end, he ended up flying at 4,500 feet and just flying through canyons and valleys to get through all the way to London. Now, he'd planned his trip at 8.5, but now he'd flown it at 4,005. He landed and he dipped his tanks, and basically it was fumes. I think he had 2 gallons of fuel left. He didn't have enough to have overshot and done a full circuit if he had to. So that's important to note about planned performance versus actual performance, and also checking your fuel and ETA. If your fuel gauge is showing quarter tanks when it should be showing half tanks of gas from your planning, something might be wrong. Lastly, crew resource management. Your passenger is a resource. I was flying with this nice guy recently, and he talked about how he was going to get his wife to go take the radio exam because she flies a lot with him. And I thought, oh, that's a great idea. You could get your partner, your friends that fly often with you, get them to go write the radio exam, and so they have their restricted operator certificate. And now they can help you out. When you fly into congested airspace, they can handle the radios, and you can concentrate on flying. So just, food for thought. There. En route. Now, most GPS systems, units, have a nice little function called nearest. Most times it's a button by itself. It's a good, nice function that shows you, it can show you aerodromes around you. Now, it's important, or not important, but it's a nice thing to do. You can go into your settings, auxiliary, and you can pre-program a filter for what kind of runways it'll show you when you hit nearest. So depending on how sophisticated your unit is, you could filter for grass runways. You can only filter, you just want hard paved runways. You can filter by runway length. You don't want to see any field that's 1,000 feet. You only want to see 3,000 feet and more, and on and on. So that's a good little thing to put in your GPS unit, just so when you hit nearest, you don't have to think. You can actually use whatever information it gives you straight away. Get home-itis. Prevent get home-itis at all costs. And this comes back to the point I made earlier about not booking your accommodation till you get there, because that just gives you a reason to stretch that trip even when you shouldn't. All right, so prevent boredom and fatigue. Stay engaged. That will keep you safe. And part of staying engaged is doing your checkpoints and your ETA calculations, and that keeps you in the moment, doing your instrument scan, looking out for traffic. Don't zone out. Don't get complacent. Avoid sugary snacks. I talked about this earlier. Avoid sugary snacks. Avoid coffee when you're going flying if you can. You just don't want to be dealing with that. You don't want to be jittery and be trying to talk, or you get task saturated and you're not physiologically fine. Lost my mouse there. All right, now arrival. Plan your descent. Chioma talked on this about using a point in her planning to decide when she was going to start descending. You don't want to be 5,000 feet over your airport and now you have to do that spiral thing, do a forward slip and you're descending at 2,000 feet per minute and your passenger's looking at you like you have two heads. Keep an active lookout at all times. It doesn't matter if you're talking a tower or if you're always keeping an eye out. Remember, it's on you to avoid other traffic. Last month, we had a near miss. A friend and I were flying down in the Florida area, GA, General Aviation Airplane, and we're talking to the tower. We were on an extended base leg, and this glider came within. I mean, we could see the branding under sunglasses. It was that close. That was the closest any thing had come close to me in my whole career. And he wasn't on radar. He wasn't talking to center. And if we hadn't spotted it, that could have been dangerous for us in that moment. So always keep an eye out at every point in time. Doesn't matter if you're talking to center, if you're talking to tower, you're getting vectored. There could be targets that aren't on radar. Don't have notes. Yeah, make sure you're talking on the right frequency if there's one. And then arrival. You've arrived successfully. It's been a great day. Is your flight plan closed? And Chioma shared some tips on how to remind yourself. Call your family or responsible person. Let them know you're safe on the ground. Now, one more slide to go. And before the slide, I'm going to ask a question. How do we log cross-country time? Or when can we log cross-country time? I'm going to throw up a poll, I think, and just answer to the best. This is not, it's just a fun exercise, and answer to the best of your knowledge of when you can log cross-country time. Mike, low caffeine warning light. Well, I guess that could be a problem too. Interesting. So from the polls, we kind of have a split. 55% say you have to land at a different aerodrome. About 10, 7, 8% say you need to file a flight plan. And 40% say you have to have planning and use organized en route procedures. So Ben, your question about sugar snacks. Passengers can take sugar snacks. So the problem with sugar snacks, if that's the only thing in your system, sugar gives you a rush, but it also gives you, there's a crash. It's called a sugar crash. Once that rush is done, you're going to be jittery. You're going to be worse than you were before you had that snack. So you want to avoid sugary snacks as a pilot. Now, as a passenger, they're going to be uncomfortable if they have that crash, but they're not flying the airplane. So really, it's not a safety concern. All right, so the poll's done. Thank you for your responses. When can you log cross-country time? Well, as for transport, to log cross-country time, you need planning, you need to have a departure procedure, and you need to have an organized en route navigation procedure. The requirement for landing at a different destination actually only comes up with licenses. You know, the PPL triangle and the CPL 300-mile nautical mile cross-country. That's where that clause comes from. You don't need to land at a different aerodrome to log it as cross-country time. What you do need to do, though, is do a departure procedure. So that's why in flight school, with your flight instructor, you could do a nav departure, where you went to your set heading point, and then he gave you, or you went to your first checkpoint, or he gave you some times to do with the whiz wheel. And then he said, okay, that's fine, let's go do steep turns. And then now you log that time from engine start till you break it off to go do steep turns. That's a nav departure, and that's cross-country time. Now, when you do a diversion, depending on what technique you use, circle line, or whatever you're doing, in a diversion, you're selecting an ETA, you're doing a fuel check. That's an en route navigation procedure. That also counts as cross-country time. You can also log that as cross-country time. Now, obviously, if you get to another airport, you've planned it, that's cross-country time. However, if you take off and go to a different aerodrome and land, and there is no planning, no en route procedures, that's not a cross-country. according to TC, as for regs. You cannot log that because you need to have had planning, departure procedure, and en route navigation procedures to log it. Lastly, in your logbook, when you fill it out, make sure you put the route of your cross country. If it's a diversion, put the diversion route. Diverted from CYQM to Salisbury, and put it in there. And that just, or if it's a nav departure, put nav departure towards Halifax. And that's how you log cross-country time. And with that, we've come to the end of my segment of the presentation. Thank you for joining us. I'll hand it over to Christine to field questions that you may have. It's nice to talk with you all.
Yeah, I do have a couple of questions. Actually, there's some good ones over here. Somebody was asking about whether or not you required ADS-B and Class B airspace in the United States. So yes, you do. And Wayne Chapin actually posted the link to the FAA airspace requirements in the chat. So if you want to just click on that and go see where ADS-B is required. Thank you very much, Wayne, for doing that. From Kevin, we have, if you get lost, is it better to keep flying straight ahead or to fly in a circle until you recognize the landmark, acknowledging you can triangulate with a VOR if you have it?
So if you're lost, well, you don't want to be flying in this area because you're just getting more lost. So I would say you don't be flying in the circle. Now that said, I asked this question to him a couple weeks back, and he said I'd whip up my phone and open Google Maps. So if you're lost, Google Maps. But yes, though, fly a circle and figure out where you're at because you don't want to be flying away. There's a chance you're flying away from the only aerodrome that's in your radius. So stay in one spot until you're found.
Yeah, and if you've been turning around in circles for quite some time, might be a good time once you do find yourselves. When you do find yourself again, just make sure you do have enough fuel to get to your destination because you may be required to change your destination depending on how much fuel you had in the first place. So just keep an eye out for that. And so somebody said that the landing fees are not in the CFS. The amount will not be in the CFS, but the fact that the aerodrome does have landing fees should be in the CFS. It is the responsibility of the airport to update NAV Canada on whether or not there are landing fees, and it should be indicated in the CFS. If it's not, you can certainly send a note to NAV Canada to let them know, but that is something that is definitely marked in the CFS. But you won't see the amount. So if you want to know how much it is, you will have to call the airport. Or oftentimes it's on their website as well. That's I stand corrected. Nope. That's it. Let me go in the Q&A. There might be some questions in there. I was in the chat. Let's see here. There's a couple about crossing into the U.S. We won't really get into that because that's going to be a whole other seminar. That's a whole other thing. The one thing I will say is that don't assume, even if you departed from a U.S. airport that has a control tower, they do not open your flight plan. You have to do that once you're in the air. And if you cross the border without a flight plan coming from the U.S., Customs doesn't know you're there. So just an FYI, you do have to call to open your flight plan in the U.S. when you're coming across the border. That's it. So yeah, so that's everything. I want to thank both Chioma and Ops for really, this was, to me, it was a really great presentation. I think you've probably refreshed a lot of people on this seminar and given a lot of good pointers. For me, I know that on my checklist moving forward, I will indicate closed flight plan, because I do have to say that you can easily get distracted once you've landed at your destination. And if you haven't done it, they will start looking for you. But that story is for a different time. But they will look for you. So any last words, Chioma?
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Really a privilege to have given this presentation. And again, I sincerely apologize for calling it a mountain rating. It's actually a mountain check, and we all have to do it in BC. So yeah, it's because of the mountains. You can actually get an actual training. I know in Squamish they do it as well, but for my school, it's part of your CPL. But thank you, everyone, for listening. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, I did mine in the United States before I went flying in Chile in the mountains. I also did a mountain check, and it was a 5-day mountain check, and there was a test at the end of it. So it feels like a rating, absolutely, because they doing chandelles and lazy eights, and it's fun, but it's testing for sure. But if you're going to be flying out there, really, really, really important to get those courses in there for sure. Ops, any last words from you?
No, it was great. It was great presenting to all of you. And Ken had a question about dual time. Basically, dual time, you're with an instructor or you're conducting flight towards training, which if you're doing some ratings don't require the instructors have an instructor rating, like a multi-engine rating. You just need an ATPL with a couple of hours PIC. So, but yeah, for dual time, you need some training has to be happening, and it's either with an instructor or a qualified person for that rating.
Thank you. All right. So I won't keep anybody any longer. It's been a great 2 hours. Hope we get to see you again. You're great presenters. And good luck with everything, Chioma. Finishing your commercial pilot's license. Please keep us posted. And glad to see you back at work, Ops.
Yeah.
Pilot seat must feel pretty good.
Yeah.
Have a great night, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And we'll see you next month for the VFR phraseology and procedures into uncontrolled airspace. All right?
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night.